Welcome to Who's Behind the Desk, a podcast series brought to you by Cape Town Office, a co-working space on Rilland Street. I'm the founder of Cape Town Office and your host, Lizelle van Rijn. And in this series, we bring you conversations with various members in our co-working community and insight into who they are, what they do, and how they came to be in a space like Cape Town Office. We've been quite busy on this side at Cape Town Office. Around 4 or 5 months ago, we started a group, and we're using WhatsApp for this at the moment, so nothing fancy, but we started a group in the office around AI, and it's called Show and Tell. And the premise of the group was a direct response to natural conversations that were happening in the common room in the kitchen on almost a daily basis about, oh my God, have you seen this thing that AI can do? And then more zoomed out conversation, if you like, about what this might mean to the various individuals' livelihoods, really, in some cases, but also to creativity as a whole. So in today's conversation with Mark, we look to unpack a little bit more of that. We've taken a step back from it. And what I mean by that is we're not just looking at it as a means of, oh my God, we're going to lose our jobs and it's such a threat or existential threat to humanity even, but we try and explore in the short time, we try and explore the consequences to creativity or the longer term consequences to what and the sort of instant delivery of your creative prompts and what that might do to, you know, the broader context of both film, creative writing, as well as fine arts, actually. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I thoroughly enjoyed sitting down with Mark, and certainly won't be the last one we do. Particularly, I feel, on AI and on other creative subjects. So please like, share, and subscribe. Welcome back to Who's Behind the Desk, episode 2 with my conversation with Mark Risk, storyboard artist. So we've been having some chats in between the first episode and this one, and the topic that's mostly been discussed actually, and in relation to storyboard artistry, I suppose, is AI. So I'm very excited about this. So I'm just going to hand it straight over to you, Mark. Welcome back.
Well, thank you. And, you and I have had sort of an ongoing discussion which relates to the discourse about AI and the impact it has in the creative field. And I'm better versed to talk about the visual arts than, say, music or writing, but they're all intrinsically linked. And I found in my recent experience, and again in storyboarding, that what comes to mind is that I use my imagination a lot. And my imagination, because I have to create spaces and people within spaces, and my imagination draws a lot from memory. And I think that's true of most people in the creative arts, that we tend to draw on our memories in order to get those key images.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about it is that it's very individual. Now, I came across this quote from Tom Waits. And Tom Waits, a fantastic actor, but also songwriter. And he creates pictures in his music. To the extent that my son, Aaron, who's like 13 years old, describes his music as black and white music, which is actually very perceptive because it's the tone of the music creates those sort of barroom interiors, which are smoke-filled, but all in black and white, film noir kind of environment. But what he said recently, I'm not sure when he said this, but it strikes me as being reasonably recent. He says, we have a deficit of wonder. I think it's because of computers. When I ask people questions now, they get on their computer. Give me a few minutes and I'll let you know. And I'm like, no, I want them to wonder about it, man. I don't want to know the answer. I just want them to wonder about it.
Sure.
And that opened up a whole kind of thing, which is, and since I've read this, I've been more and more concerned about AI in relation to the creative field, especially the visual arts. because I realize how much I draw on my memory in order to create images and so on.
Right.
And this is a very old um, fact or feature about humankind, is that we have imagination in order to create. We're the only species who does that. I mean, and it's a God-given gift that we have. And if I could just go way back in time to the time of Homer, and the reason why I mention Homer, the Greek writer of like the 8th century BC,
That's
you know,
way
and it's
back.
long, and the reason why I come to it is because my eldest son, actually, it was on his reading list for matric.
Amazing.
And I thought, well, maybe I should actually look at this, actually, because I felt as though he was one up on me. And it confused him greatly. It's very detailed and very intense. But the interesting thing about Homer, and this is where it comes to prompting, and a prompt in its original meaning, as far as I'm concerned, are words whispered from the wings or in front of the stage to an actor when he had forgotten his words.
Yeah.
So you have
It's
to prompt
literally a
it.
prompt to your next line.
It's to fill space.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't corpse on stage.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's that
yeah.
kind of thing. And the Homeric epics, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer used, and this is this is at a time when nothing was written down. Amazingly, this was a performance which was episodic.
Wow.
So
Okay.
actors and performers would perform this, and believe me, it's massive. It's got everything in it. It's got wars, emotions, jealousies, all the kind of stuff that would go into like a modern soapy.
Yeah.
And interestingly, what they did was they would have a cutoff at a certain time in each performance, and they'd be performing this in front of the aristocracy and nobles
Completely
and
unscripted.
so on. Probably guided by key words, but the
Okay.
interesting thing was, how did they remember their lines? And one of the devices he used was similes, adjectives, to describe things. So, in other words, he would talk about the ink blue sea to describe the color of the sea. Now, those of us who have used fountain pens in the past remember what ink blue is. It's a deep, deep blue. So you have that in mind, and they would have had that in mind back in the day as well. Dawn is described, the beginning of the day is described as the rosy-fingered dawn. That's the color creeping over the landscape. And in doing this, he gave these prompts to his performers that this is the way they could remember. And not only that, but how people would remember what they were saying.
Right.
So that the legend and the epic lived on not just in the performers' minds, but also in those who actually listened.
Yeah.
So I found that very moving, in fact, when I read Homer, because I realized, yes, that's very interesting, because now we use prompts to give a phrase or a description for AI to come up with an image. And I'm talking about the creative art, the visual arts now, because I know there's a whole field in terms of medicine and engineering where AI is employed very fruitfully. But in the creative arts, what happens is that you give a prompt and you get an image in return. So it could be a description of two people having a cup of coffee in a street in the style of Rembrandt.
Yes.
And what will come up is a beautiful image of that scenario. But now if I was reading that in a novel, I would be creating that image in my mind. It's the theater of the mind, and I'll come to that again in terms of radio. The theater of the mind exercises your imagination based on your memory of when you might have seen something similar to that of two people having a coffee in a street, where that was, what the architecture was like, and so on. But AI will come up with an artificial, what would it play? I wouldn't say, I would say plagiarized from the artistic techniques of artists to come up with an image which is its definitive image of what you have described. So there's two fields there. One is that I am conjuring up that image in my mind, and very individually, because if you actually read the same phrase, you would come up with something else
Well,
based on your
quite.
memory.
But in your line of work,
Yeah.
you receive a script.
Yes.
Then there's a conversation. Presumably, there's a conversation between you and the director
Yeah.
after you've had some time to read through the script. But what's produced in terms of what you're actually drawing is coming from your imagination, which
It
is
is.
derived from the text.
It's derived from the text and also my memory of a cumulative memory
Sure.
of similar situations.
Yes.
So I've seen that. I may have seen it in the movies. I mean, I may be auto-prompting myself to an extent because I'll remember what I've done before as well myself.
Yeah.
But also new stuff. It's apparently new stuff, but it comes from my memory,
Yeah.
old buildings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Another interesting aspect of this, and it's again part of the theater of the mind, and it's all linked because I don't separate myself from, say, for instance, the spoken word. And here we are, this is the spoken word. But back in the 1950s, 40s and 50s, there was a guy on radio called Jack Webb. He came up with the detective series Dragnet, which later became a TV series.
Yes, that's right.
But it started on radio. Now, he was obsessed with creating space and sound. So and this is all figmentary and didn't actually exist, but he would calculate the number of footsteps from his desk as a detective to the door, where, of course, the Foley artist would be going and opening the door. And,
Right. Yes.
But he would count the number of footsteps to the door, and that's what we heard. So we heard clink, 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 and that defined the space. Now, he would be very faithful to that anytime he was in his office,
Right.
in the storyline.
Yes, yes.
So that we were able to furnish his audio with an architectural space, an interior space. We didn't know anything else about the bookshelves or what files are on the table and so on. It was sufficient for us to be in a space where we could expand our imagination and furnish that room in whatever way we wanted, or in whatever way we'd seen in the movies previously, to like a bookshelf and so on.
Okay, so the question would be then, do you feel that AI is doing a disservice because it fills in all of those details for you, rather
Yes.
than letting the imagination?
Yes, I think the vital component that is missing in AI is an individual interpretation.
Right.
Because again, what you would see when Jack Webb does his Dragnet radio
Or
series,
even a written thing, right?
or
So
even it's especially a written thing,
Yeah.
actually, especially a written thing where words will describe a certain scenario, and you will invest your memory in that imagination, in the imagination that you use in order to create that space.
Right.
And even people, there's a wonderful Irish writer called Roddy Doyle who did The Commitments, and he did several other books. He never describes the person. The only description you've got of the people involved in his story are what he says and what other people say to him. It's an
Interesting.
extraordinary feat of good writing where you can create an image of someone without
actually
the
describing the
individual,
person at all.
without describing the person
Interesting.
at all. So I do draw a lot on my imagination. Often it has to be said. Often I'll draw on my memory of what I did the last time when I'm drawing a storyboard, similar storyboard or an action sequence. What did I do before? And then include what maybe the stunt people
Yeah.
have to offer in order for
Yeah.
me to do that. But a vast amount of that, and this is why it's so difficult to teach what I do,
Yeah.
is personal experience. Because I am drawing on my individual. Someone else would do something different, but
Of course.
I can't teach someone, all those
No.
all those cumulative spaces that I've
And the
been
trouble
working
also
in.
is that it depends on how wide or how broad the sort of depth of knowledge is, because you
Yes.
can't, you can only draw from what you can draw from, right? I mean,
Yes.
as the adage goes. So I suppose with AI, I mean, I mentioned to you, I attended this conference this weekend, and a fascinating session on the Sunday, all about AI. You know, yes, it's overwhelming in terms of the speed that it's progressing and the capabilities that allows an everyday user to sort
Yeah,
of take advantage of,
sure.
especially if you're trying to hustle, expedite your career or, create some sort of sideline income. The thing that struck me though is that are we just generating content for content's sake,
Yeah.
or are we actually focused on generating good content? And then what defines good content? So if an AI, we spoke about this. So if a book is written by AI
Mm.
and it happens to top the New York Times, bestsellers list for 10 weeks
Yeah.
running, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I don't know, and that I guess that is the big debate. How democratic can we be in terms of allowing people to create things who would normally not be writers or painters or musicians or composers? Um, because now it's getting to the stage where an accountant or a secondhand car dealer. Now, I have to say, I rely on my accountant to get my tax returns in. Okay, so I'm
Yes,
not saying
yes,
anything against accountants. And I've bought several secondhand cars,
yes.
and they all work, and it's magnificent. But my point is that anyone can actually turn out a Rembrandt now. Now, I'm anticipating
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
anticipating your intake of breath there, because, because can they? Is it original? But it comes down to what you're saying about writing. Like, if someone can create a bestseller, or shortly will be able to create a bestseller, what happens to the writers who have been hard grafting for decades before they get their novel published, who have gone through all that process of learning creatively and what to edit out and what to put in and the emotion and all that kind of stuff, all that personal
Yeah.
stuff going into writing, and the same with artists.
But
And
without a good agent and without an open publisher,
yeah,
that
well,
manuscript is probably lying in some drawer somewhere,
it could be. It
right?
could
And
be.
so,
And I guess there's a kind of a Darwinian thing about, cream rises to the top. And, those who make it. But I
with a bit of
agree.
luck,
I agree. There are a lot of very fine artists and fine artists who languish because they can't get an audience for their work. Yeah. So from that
yeah,
point of view, it is worthwhile. You see, I'm a little bit precious about the amount of time I have devoted over the decades now,
yes,
showing my age, over the decades of learning how to do things, and it may be stuff that's irrelevant now and has been superseded. I was talking to Mappo the other day about I was touching up black and white photographs with a two bristle brush when I was in art college,
right,
way before Photoshop.
yes,
But somehow I cherish that. I
yeah,
cherish all those odd things.
yeah,
Graphic design using cow gum, and galleys of text and pasting them literally down on a layout, using a scalpel and a parallel rule. All of those, and typography. I loved studying typography and the nature of type, and how it is manifested in terms of a printed page. And there's a whole thing that now which is all automatic.
yeah,
So you type something out on Facebook or whatever, it's automatically doing all the things that people learnt about over centuries
yeah,
in terms of character spacing, excite, and all that kind of stuff. And yes, it may be obsolete, but I personally think that the apprenticeship, say, for instance, of an artist to a known artist, in other words, you get the school of Leonardo, those guys were not able to touch a paintbrush until they'd sort of been filling
that's
paint,
right. Yep,
squirting palettes, and
years.
stuff like, years and years. And they came out with those extraordinary works. Now, you can actually put in, as I say, you can put in Rembrandt as part of the prompt, or famous watercolor artist, or in the style of Hokusai, the Japanese
Yeah,
artist, and it'll come out with something which looks and resembles and is seen as that work of art, or of that school from that artist.
I doubt that it would be viewed as a masterpiece, though.
No, but the common perception of it is.
And that speaks to me more. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But that to me speaks more about where we are, where we find ourselves as a society, where the disposable. I mean, it makes all of these things quite disposable.
Yes.
And that's not new. And I think that, we've spoken about this before, being a vinyl collector myself.
Yes.
Junkie, really. Analog is king for me, and that's kind of where that is. And I recognize the fact that music through streaming platforms has become quite disposable.
Yes.
I don't even pay much attention to whatever it is that I'm listening to as part of a playlist that's forming a 3.5 hour, sort of in the background, going on. So AI to me is not responsible for that.
No.
As much as
it's a facility. It's like when Macs first came out, using Apple Macs. Did all that graphic design. It was a fantastic tool to have. Even a Wacom tablet with a stylus is not something that I got into, but I respect those who actually use it as a tool.
Yeah.
Towards an end, and there's all sorts of textures you can build into that. But there's still craftsmanship in terms of the artist.
Absolutely.
Pressing down on a stylus,
And I truly think that where we are now is the end of mediocrity. I think AI has accelerated the fact that people can no longer just coast and get away with doing the bare minimum and just producing. I think that where we are is a situation where the cream will invariably rise rise to the top, and people will recognize that exceptional effort, combined years of experience, talent, vision.
Do you think so?
I do. I do.
I hope so. And I really do hope so, because I see a diminishing of, and this comes back to imagination and memory.
Yeah.
And the memory of a composer who's composing a work. He has accumulated a vast amount of knowledge, having listened and performed over years and years as a musician himself, perhaps. That wealth of knowledge is now at the click of a button,
Or is it? I don't know. I think it's kind of like presenting the answer to a complex math problem without showing the path that led to solving the math problem.
Well, I'm amazed by. Speaking about maths, I'm amazed that my 13-year-old son can do maths. I couldn't do maths, and going through that process. He may never use it in his life, but it's the learning curve that people have,
and that's
which I think is a necessary.
You don't create fonts yet. Typography is something that.
Yes. Yes.
So I think it forms part and parcel of the layers and layers and layers that then bears fruit whenever you're sitting down, presumably, with a new script.
Yes, I think you know what it is, Lizelle. I feel an anticipation of sadness in terms of the next generation coming through, that things are very much at fingertips. It's like selfies, it's like personal image. We're obsessed with imagery, and we'll doctor that image, even in a cell phone thing. We'll put it through a filter,
right,
so that we don't see the pimples and spots.
Right.
And I'm beyond repair in terms of that. But there is that thing of being perfect. So, and there is that thing about AI, about the perfection. Is that what we're looking for?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Is it perfection?
I think that's the big question. And I don't think that there's, we don't know.
Yeah.
We won't know for at least a few decades.
I'm a great fan of imperfection, because
Likewise.
I think imperfection has character.
Likewise.
And I think perfection has very little character.
And I think we've also spoken about this too. In music, you would find the live recordings are always going to be richer,
Yes.
and often because of the mistakes that are made.
Yes.
And the mistakes often turn out to be the sort of gold nuggets.
Yes.
I'm not as pessimistic, I have to say. I'm quite optimistic as to, I think we're going to hit a plateau quite soon. I think there's been an exponential curve in the last few years going upwards, and we are being inundated. Where it will stop, I have no idea. But I think, I'd like to think anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Um, I just like to come back to this whole idea of perfection and so on. And um, I remember watching my sons playing sport, and I was behind my phone watching the action in my phone. And I
Amazing. Okay.
realized that what I was doing was I was creating something. And I'm just going to give you a Hemingway kind of thing on this. I was looking at the viewfinder, not the live action. And being an analog person, you'll appreciate this because you're very analog as well in terms of vinyl. And, it has a value. Experiencing that thing live is infinitely better than watching it through a viewfinder. When would I see that again? Here's the thing about Hemingway wrote a little short story, and he wrote about this bullfighter called Manea, who was at the time of writing was lying in his bed, gasping for air in a darkened room, because he was dying of pneumonia. So he was very famous. So men and their sons went out and bought full-size posters of this bullfighter. And in doing so, they removed the memory of him by looking at the picture. And that was very prescient. This was written in the 1920s and 30s, before we became obsessed with capturing things. People were doing that then, but not as much. And what it speaks to is that the live memory of things and the experience that we have as human beings is being superseded by imagery of ourselves, of things, of all of that kind of stuff, where we're missing, to an extent, we're missing the point. And I think that's my concern. So I'm glad that you're optimistic about the future, because I think we need to be. And perhaps I'm speaking very much from a minority standpoint from the creative field, but I too feel concerned, not really for myself, but for future generations.
I hear you. My optimism is based in I'm hoping that we come back to. So, in the last 5 years or so, we've seen a massive revival of analog culture through vinyl records.
Yes.
And a lot of that, if you were to go and purvey the rabbit hole that is TikTok, you would find that it's Gen Zs. It's really, really young people
Yeah.
that are now getting, first of all, introduced to the format, and often through artists like Taylor Swift. I'm by no means a Swiftie, no offense to anybody listening who is. But the fact is that, young kids, sort of age 16, and are buying vinyl records and vinyl and record players,
Yeah.
because they want the new Taylor Swift album to listen to in that format.
Yeah.
And that I find very fascinating, and that I find very interesting when it comes to the sort of so there's a whole ritual that they sort of share in terms of caring for it, and
Yes.
it's returning back to that ritual of come over to my house and let's listen to some Taylor Swift records, right?
Which is what I did
And that's
as a
my
teenager.
optimism.
I'm still, I have to say, completely mesmerized by the idea of a stylus, of a needle, picking up not just one track, but
Totally.
two tracks.
Totally.
That,
And
that is more impressive to me than anything digital.
quite right. And,
know?
and the idea of remaining present in that moment and engaging with
Yeah.
it, whether it's a concert.
Yeah.
So instead of recording it with your phone, you're actually putting your phone in your pocket and you're engaging completely with who's on the stage. So there is an optimism for me in that people will seek out the more authentic experience
Yes.
naturally.
Yeah.
And once the hype has died down of this amazing little fancy toy called AI,
Yeah.
that's my hope anyway.
Well, thank God. I admire your optimism. I just want to finish off just on
Sure.
on coming back to this quote again. I think it's worthwhile repeating. Give me a few minutes, says the person who's got a computer, and I'll let you know what the answer is. And I'm like, no, I want them to wonder about it, man. I don't want to know the answer. I just want them to wonder about it.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to leave it for today. We shall continue this conversation, Mr. Risk.
Great.
Thank you so much.
And thank
Appreciate it.
you.
And thank you to Voicenote Productions for diligently looking after us today. Appreciate that. And we'll see you guys soon.
Great.
big thanks to Mark Risk making the time and sitting down with me to have this conversation. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Your comments, as always, are so welcome. So please give us some feedback, any subjects that you think we should be looking at or tackling next. And yeah, we'll catch up with you soon. Thanks for listening. Thank you, as always, to Voicenote Productions for helping us make this and putting it so lovingly together for us. As everything with Coworking, this is a real community project, so we couldn't have done this without the members in the community. We certainly can't do this without you out there listening and sharing. So Voicenote Productions, big up and big thanks, and obviously Cape Town office for hosting us and giving us the space to do so.